He took the fire for an alien princess and won a queen's love. I took 9 shots before I stopped counting. 4 in the armor, 3 in the arm, 2 in places that should have killed me. Didn't know her name. Didn't know this city. Barely knew this planet. I just knew a kid was screaming, and nobody else was between her and the guns. The plaza of echoing glass had been quiet a heartbeat earlier. Just another off-worlder leaning against a stall, trading his last few rations for a burnt-smelling cup of Kesh brew. Rian Cole had one boot hooked on the stall brace, shoulders loose, watching the light move. All around him, the towers of Virelon rose like glass and bone, translucent spires catching the violet sun and throwing it back in shards of color. The Selathi moved through the plaza in drifting streams, their pale, opalescent skin catching every reflection, their robes like liquid ink in starlight. Tourist brochure perfect, until the scream. It cut straight through the murmur of vendors and song orbs, a high, raw sound that didn't care about language. Heads snapped toward it. Ryan's did too. He saw a ripple in the crowd. People stumbling aside, stalls tipping, a shockwave of panic. And at the center of that chaos, a woman in deep crimson ceremonial robes, standing in front of a small figure clutching a glowing toy sphere. The woman's garment was stitched with lines of living light, moving sigils that even Ryan, with his terrible alien languages, recognized as serious rank. The girl behind her couldn't have been more than 6 by human estimates. Silver-green hair in twin braids, skin like sunrise marble, streaked now with tears. The attackers were obvious. They didn't walk like locals. They shouldered through people. Dark exo-weave armor, faces half-covered, rifles humming with the ugly blue of unlicensed plasma. Ryan didn't think. Couldn't. The old part of him, the piece the Terran Legion had carved and then discarded, moved first. He dropped the brew, hand going to the compact rail pistol at the small of his back. The stall keeper shouted something about payment. Ryan was already running. The first volley came from the assassins. Plasma burst lanced across the plaza, carving gouts of heat through air and stone. Civilians screamed and dove. A musician's floating amp crystal exploded, raining shards. The crimson-robed woman spun, trying to shield the child with her own body. There were guards. Of course there were guards, but they were on the outer ring of the plaza, too far, too slow. Ryan hit a kiosk shoulder first, used it as cover, brought the pistol up, and squeezed twice. The rifle of the nearest attacker spat sparks as the slug sheared its barrel and the shooter's wrist. The figure staggered back, howling. "Down!" Ryan bellowed. In trade and in old Terran battle canton, because somebody would understand one of them, damn it. The woman did exactly what he expected from someone important. She stayed upright, trying to block the child, so he moved. He sprinted, boots hammering marble, another plasma bolt scorching the air beside him. The second hit low, tearing a line of fire across his thigh. Armor gel hardened, but the pain slammed up his spine like a spike. Ryan kept moving. 2 more shots, one center mass on a gunman, another through the knee of the one re-aiming at the girl. They fell in different directions, shouting. The crowd was basically a hurricane now. One assassin broke from the others and drove straight at the robed woman, knife out, not even bothering with the rifle. Up close would get past shields. Rian didn't aim. He hit. He slammed into the knifeman's shoulder first, felt something in his own collarbone crunch. Rolled them both across the polished floor. The knife skated off his chest plate, scraped along his neck. Warmth ran down his collar. He jammed the pistol up under the attacker's chin and pulled the trigger. The body twitched, went slack. Another bolt caught him in the upper arm, spinning him half around. He heard himself yell, but the sound came from far away. The child was exposed again. She stood there frozen, tiny chest heaving. Her toy sphere flickered like a dying star in her hands. Behind her, the crimson-robed woman turned just in time to take a full plasma burst through the ribs. The smell of burned fabric and flesh hit Ryan a second later. She dropped. No slow motion drama. Just down. The girl's scream was razor wire. Ryan staggered between her and the last active gunman on the flank. His HUD flickered warnings at him, but he'd long ago trained himself to ignore anything that wasn't a clear dead right now. He planted himself in front of the kid, raised his pistol with a hand that barely wanted a grip, and fired until the magazine clicked dry. The assassin fired back. Bolt 1. Chest. His armor stopped most of it. The rest went hunting for vital organs. Bolt 2. Gut. Armor failed. Panic red flared at the edge of his vision. Bolt 3. Shoulder joint, where protection thinned. Everything in his left arm just vanished. Bolt 4. Lower ribs. Breathing turned into a negotiation. He heard himself laugh, a short, ugly bark, because of course it was one of those days. The fifth shot came as the girl moved. She tried to hug his leg like a shield, like small, terrified kids do. The gunman adjusted aim. Ryan didn't decide. The universe went narrow, cold, and simple. He threw his useless left side toward the rifle, twisting his body to make a wall over her. Bolt 5 punched through the damaged chest plate and drove molten agony straight into his lung. Bolt 6 followed, then 7 and 8, slamming into weakened armor already slagged from the first impacts. Each felt less like pain and more like a hard shove in a dark room. He heard metal boots pounding, heavy, disciplined, in unison, not panicked police, military. Blue-white lances of contained lightning crossed the plaza, and the last attacker's body fell in pieces. Rian dropped to his knees. It was strange the way the light fractured across the plaza roof, splintering into 1,000 shards. Someone was yelling in a language that vibrated like bells. The kid's tiny hands were on his chest. "Don't," he tried, but blood turned the word into something wet. Her eyes were huge, luminous, ringed in gold. Alien, yes, but also just a child's eyes. He managed a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "You're okay," he slurred. "That's the only part that matters." Somewhere behind him, someone shouted an order. A field stretcher unfolded from nothing. Ryan's world narrowed to a single point of bright sound and light, then collapsed. Darkness was quiet. Sound came back first. Not the sharp chaos of a plaza, but a distant harmonic hum like a choir half heard through walls. Then smell. Sterile air, faint spice, and something floral that reminded him of the gardens his grandmother had watched on the vids. Ryan's first thought was, well, either I'm dead or somebody gave the afterlife a budget. He tried to move his hands. They didn't respond. Tried to curse. His mouth produced a dry croak. "Don't," a voice said. Soft, higher than an adult's. "You'll pull the regrowth lines." His eyes opened. The ceiling above him curved like the inside of a shell. Layers of translucent crystal woven with strands of slow-moving light. The bed beneath him adjusted automatically to his micro-movements, cradling, tracking. And at his right side, perched on a floating stool far too big for her, sat the kid. Her skin was a pale rose gold, deepening along the edges like a permanent blush. Bands of luminescent markings curled at her temples in patterns that glowed and dimmed with her pulse. Her hair, what he'd thought was silver green, was actually a cascade of fine feather-like strands shifting slowly between colors. Sea foam, then moonlight, then pale mint. Same wide eyes. Same toy sphere clutched tight to her chest, now dimmed to a gentle glow. "You're awake," she whispered, and her voice shook. "You didn't die." Ryan swallowed against the burning in his throat. "Sorry to disappoint." It came out rough, but in trade, the slow, careful syllables he'd learned across a dozen ports. She blinked, then smiled, small and fierce. "You joke. That's human, yes?" "You've met humans before," he asked, "only in hollows." She set the toy sphere on the bed, as if making an offering. You stepped in front of the fire, for me. Mother says that is what your people call suicidal bravery. Your mother sounds like she's met humans before, Rian muttered. The door hissed open. Instinct sent that old Legion tension straight down his spine. He would have reached for a weapon if he'd had one, or working arms. 3 figures entered first in armor that made the plaza guards look like parade decorations. Their suits were matte, silver black, segmented plates that seemed to grow from their bodies, tracing their limbs in sharp lines. Each carried a spear that hummed faintly, crackling with captured energy. Their visors were up, revealing hard, angular Selathi faces lined with bioluminescent tattoos. Soldiers, no question. They stopped 2 paces inside and went down to one knee. The girl slipped off her stool and straightened, suddenly solemn. Rian's gaze tracked past the soldiers. The 4th figure stepped through. You didn't need to know anything about alien cultures to recognize importance when it walked into a room. She was taller than most Selathi, long-limbed and poised, her skin a deeper, cooler opal than her daughter's. Threads of pure light traced from the corners of her eyes down along her jaw, meeting at her throat in a pattern that echoed the glyphs etched into the room's walls. Her hair flowed in a mantle of pale, luminous teal, bound at the temples with thin bands of living metal. The crown resting on her brow wasn't spiky or theatrical. It was a circlet of shifting light, projecting faint symbols into the air. Reality itself seemed to subtly rearrange around her. Her gaze landed on him like a physical thing. "This is him," she said in flawless trade. Her voice was rich, layered, like 2 harmonies sung at once. The girl hurried to her side and grabbed a fold of her gown. "Mother, this is Rian. He bleeds so much." Rian tried to push himself up. Tubes tugged. The bed resisted. Pain flared, but much less than he remembered. Whatever they'd used on him was obscenely good. "Easy," one of the armored guards murmured, but stayed kneeled. Rian managed to prop himself halfway. "Let me guess," he rasped. "I'm in trouble for scaring your city to death." The woman's lips curved, the faintest ghost of amusement, but her eyes stayed intent. "You are in the High Heart Ward at the core of Viralon Spire," she said. "Very few ever see this place without invitation. Fewer still survive being carried here." "High Heart Ward," Rian repeated. "Sounds expensive." "Rian Cole of Terra," she continued, ignoring the comment. "My healers tell me you took 9—" She glanced at some invisible display. "Yes, 9 coherent plasma impacts in under 12 seconds. No shield, no active plating. You fought until your heart stopped, and then for several seconds after that. Old habit," he muttered. "Hard to turn off." She took a step closer. There was no mistaking the command in how she moved. Even the guards seemed to adjust with her, like planets around a star. "I am Maelis Varen," she said, "High Sovereign of Selathar, Keeper of the 7 Seas, first voice of the choir." The girl's tiny shoulders squared. "And I am Sarai Varen, first heir. You saved me." There it was. He'd guessed, but hearing it out loud made something cold settle in his gut. "Your Highness," he said, looking between them. "So the fancy robe in the plaza was—" "Her shield, Governor," Maelis said quietly. "And my cousin. She died buying my daughter seconds. You spent those seconds like blood." The kid, Sarai, was watching him with 2 old eyes, waiting. Rian cleared his throat. "Seemed like the going rate?" The Sovereign studied him for a long moment. Her eyes were not human eyes. They were layered with shifting iridescence, reading details he couldn't name. "Do you know to whom you gave your life?" she asked. He shrugged. Or tried. "Tiny stranger with bad odds. That's all I needed to know." The silence that followed was heavy. The armored guards looked at the floor as if the moment itself was sacred. Sarai's fingers tightened on her mother's gown. Maelis stepped right up to the bed. Sovereigns did not, Rian suspected, usually step right up to bedsides. She lowered herself, not quite to her knees, but enough that their faces were level. In our law, she said carefully, to interpose your body between a royal heir and death is to claim what we call a soul bond debt. It is not a transaction, it is a vow from the crown to the savior that cannot be balanced in a single lifetime. Rian blinked. Lady, I was just trying to keep a kid from getting ventilated. Something like a smile tugged at her mouth. And yet you bled like a knight of our oldest songs. She reached out. Her hand hovered over his chest, where faint lines glowed through the semi-transparent bandages, scars already knitting, regrown tissue shimmering faintly with borrowed Selathi biotech. Rian Cole of Terra, she said formally. By sovereign right, I name you Valiant of Selethar. This world owes you not only thanks, but protection and belonging. That word hit him sideways. Belonging. Rian tried to deflect on instinct. I'm not exactly the palace type. Sarai stepped closer, her small hand trembling as she slid her fingers around his wrist. Her skin was warm, surprisingly solid. I want him to stay, she said fiercely, switching to her own language for half the sentence, then back to trade. He feels safe. Maelis looked at her daughter, some of the hard lines in her face softening. When she looked back at Rian, her voice changed. Less queen, more woman, who had almost lost everything. You put yourself between my heart and a firing line, she said. Whatever life you think you left behind, Rian Cole, this palace is yours as long as you want it. He glanced at the tubes, at the alien ceiling, at the impossible child gripping his wrist like he was the anchor keeping her from drifting away. He'd meant to die that day. He knew it, in some quiet part of himself. It had been a simple equation. Kid lives, he doesn't. Fair trade. The universe, as usual, refused to stick to the plan. Rian exhaled slowly. Guess I've had worse offers. Sarai beamed. Maelis's eyes flickered with what might have been relief. And that was how Rian Cole, ex-Legion drifter with nothing to his name but an old pistol and a stubborn streak, woke up in a queen's private ward and accidentally became the most important human in a world that had never expected to need one. Healing was supposed to hurt. That's what Rian's experience said. Broken bones, burnt lungs, shredded muscle. Those were weeks of agony. If you were lucky enough to survive at all. Selathi medicine made a mockery of that memory. The next few days blurred together in a haze of bright light and cool hands. Nanofluid dripped into his veins, carrying clouds of microscopic machines that dissolved dead tissue and rebuilt it, knitting cellular latticework as if sculpting from living clay. Pale bands of biofilm wrapped his torso, glowing faintly as they synchronized with his heartbeat. There was pain, but it was distant, muffled, like thunder behind soundproof glass. The real trouble was the quiet. Rian had never had so much nothing to do, except talk to a princess. Sarai visited every morning, always with something clutched in her hands, a new hollow toy, a data slate, a plate of sweets she wasn't supposed to sneak. The guards pretended not to notice when she did. You've been awake less than 2 days, Mar. Hinaltumurins. She climbed onto the edge of his bed, feet first, and you already have the entire security staff wrapped around your little finger. She tilted her head. It is easier to ask forgiveness than permission. This is true on Terra, yes? Who taught you that? She grinned. The Palace Network. I watched 3 seasons of Rogue Trader, Frontier Law while you were asleep. Right, Rian muttered. Remind me to apologize to your mother. Sarai asked endless questions. Some were the kind any kid asked. Why is space black? Why don't humans glow? Do you dream in color? Others were very specific. How close do you have to be to fire a ballistic pistol in null G without hitting yourself with ricochet? He answered what he could, deflected what he shouldn't, and found himself telling her stories he hadn't planned to share with anyone again. The quiet outpost on Demos 4 where he'd learned to breathe recycled air without gagging. The time someone in his squad had smuggled a kitten aboard a troop carrier, and the captain had unironically declared it an unauthorized organic morale device. Sarai laughed so hard she cried at that one. When she left, the room felt emptier than it had any right to. The ward itself was absurd. It wasn't just a hospital room, it was a sanctuary. The walls shifted color with his vitals, cycling from cool blues to warm golds. A view sphere projected the city outside in real time, towers spiraling up, sky lanes of soft light tracing the flow of traffic. The distant shimmer of the harbor where Sethel-class ships kissed the sea. Once, in the middle of the artificial night, he woke to find the view sphere hovering close, projecting a slow orbit over Selithar. The planet looked like someone had taken a sapphire and dipped it in opal, all swirling blues and whites with hints of impossible violet where the shallow seas met crystal reefs. He'd been everywhere and nowhere. Still, something about this world tugged at him. On the fourth day, the physicians, tall, soft-spoken Selathi in robes marked with intricate light lattice, declared him structurally sound. "You will feel residual fatigue," one said, folding his long fingers neatly. "Your tissues are still adjusting to the interface of Selathi nanites and human biology. Do not attempt strenuous combat for at least 12 hours. 12 hours, Rian repeated dryly. What restraint? The healer's face didn't quite understand sarcasm, but he inclined his head anyway. Her Majesty requests your presence when you can walk without falling. Define falling, Rian muttered. He stood. The floor adjusted, providing subtle support. Pain fired along old pathways, but his muscles obeyed. For someone who had technically flatlined 2 days earlier, he felt weirdly alive. They dressed him in simple palace linens, dark gray tunic, matching trousers, boots that hugged his feet and adjusted to his gait. No armor, no weapon. It felt wrong and strangely light. 2 of the armored elite, the luminous guard he'd heard someone whisper, took position at his flanks and escorted him out. The High Heart ward opened into a corridor that looked like the inside of a cathedral redesigned by patient water. Arches of translucent stone met overhead, embedded with thin seams of light that pulsed in time with some deep, slow rhythm. The air tasted like fresh rain and something floral. Rian tried not to gawk. He failed. They passed other wards occupied by no one. Libraries suspended in midair. A meditation chamber where glowing spheres rose and fell in time with the breathing of silent figures. A window that was not a window, showing stars at impossible angles. Finally, they came to a set of doors taller than any building he'd grown up near. No guards stood before them. They didn't need to. The stone itself recognized Maelis' authority. At their approach, the doors flowed aside soundlessly. Rian stepped into the throne hall of Selithar. He'd expected something grand and cold. Terran bigwigs loved echoing chambers and sharp corners, places meant to make you feel small. The Hall of Tides was enormous, yes, but it didn't feel like it was trying to crush him. A wide path of pale stone led from the entrance to a raised dais at the far end, flanked on both sides by channels of flowing water. Columns rose like petrified waves, each wrapped in slow-moving glyphs of light. The ceiling was open, not to the sky, but to a projected ocean. Schools of luminous creatures drifted overhead, their shadows rippling across the floor. Selathi courtiers stood in quiet clusters along the edges, robes in every shade of deep sea and night sky. Conversations hushed as Rian was led down the central path. Dozens of alien eyes tracked him, but there was curiosity there, not hostility. The throne itself was more of a grown structure than a carved one, like someone had paused the sea mid-surge and shaped it into a seat. Maelis sat there, crown a faint halo around her head. Sarai perched on the step below, legs swinging, trying to imitate her mother's poise and failing adorably. Rian stopped when the guards did. Not too close, not too far. Military instincts lined up his posture out of sheer habit. Nobody told him to kneel, so he didn't. He inclined his head instead, respect but not servility. Maelis's mouth did that almost smile again. "Rian Cole," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the hall. "You stand in the Hall of Tides, where monarchs of Selathar have spoken judgment and mercy for 12,000 cycles. Today we speak something simpler." He arched a brow. "Is this where you tell me I owe you for the medical bill?" A ripple of laughter moved through the courtiers like a breeze. It surprised him. Courts, in his experience, did not laugh with outsiders. Maelis's gaze sharpened, but with interest, not anger. "You continue to jest at the edge of death," she observed. "Is that a shield or a compulsion?" "Little of both," he admitted. "Helps keep the fear from getting too loud." Her eyes softened, just for a heartbeat. It was gone a moment later, replaced by the Sovereign. "Virelon bled in the plaza that day," she said, and the hall grew quiet. "We lost kin. We lost a shield governor. We nearly lost our heir." Murmurs. Heads bowed briefly toward Sarai, who frowned as if impatient with the reminder. "But we did not," Maelis continued, "because a wandering human with no allegiance to us, no obligation, no reward promised, chose to stand between our heart and those who would rip it out." Her gaze locked on his. "Explain this to me, Rian Cole. Why?" He hated this question. Commanders had asked it before, over bodies, over debrief screens. Why did you go back for them? Why dive into a burning compartment? Why disobey an order to retreat? The answers never fit in words. He shrugged one shoulder. "There was a kid," he said. "People with guns, no one else in the way." "And your life?" "Didn't seem worth as much as hers." The hall held its breath. Even the projected fish overhead seemed to pause. Maelis drew in a slow breath. "On Selathar," she said, "we believe souls are not measured by length of days, but by the depth of their choices. You made a choice our own nobles once swore to make long ago, when the crown was less comfortable than it is now." She rose from the throne. The room shifted with her. "In the name of Selathar," she said, voice ringing like struck crystal, "I name you guardian of the first heir. Your life, should you accept the title, will be woven into our law as shield to Sarai Varen until your heart ceases to beat." Sarai brightened so suddenly she almost glowed. "You mean he stays?" Maelis glanced down at her, then back at Rian. "He stays, if he desires it." Rian's first instinct was to refuse. He was good at leaving. It was the thing he was best at. Stay too long, you started to care. Stay too long, you became someone who could be hurt. And yet, the image of the plaza was burned into him, the smell, the heat, the tiny hands clinging to him. If he walked out now, if he could walk out now, knowing someone had already marked that child for death. He met Maelis's gaze. "What does being guardian actually mean?" "You will live here," she said simply. "Train with the luminous guard. Advise me when human perspective is needed. Stand beside my daughter in public. Stand in front of her when danger comes. You will be given rank, but not shackles. If one day you decide you must leave, we will not cage you." That last part sounded very non-binding, he said. "Ask any of my ministers," she said dryly. "I do not keep what does not wish to stay." Sarai had no such diplomatic restraint. "Please," she blurted, stepping forward. "You promised to tell me about oceans and storms and chocolate. You cannot do that if you leave." "Chocolate is a serious diplomatic asset," Rian said gravely. "Wouldn't want to cause an incident." Maelis's lips twitched. "So?" Rian looked at the hall, at the courtiers, at the impossible ocean ceiling, at the tiny alien princess staring up like his answer was the structure her future would be built on. He thought of the empty routes he'd been bouncing along before this, of station bars where no one remembered your name because you never gave it, of waking up with no reason to care if he slept again. "Fine," he said, exhaling. "I'll stay. Someone has to make sure she doesn't watch a 4th season of Rogue Trader." Sarai launched herself at him. He barely had time to brace before she grabbed his waist and hugged like a gravitational anomaly. The hall broke into sound. Selathi approval wasn't clapping, it was a rising harmonic chord, voices layering in complex resonance, filling the chamber with music that crept right down into his bones. Maelis watched him with a look he couldn't read fully. Relief? Yes. Gratitude. And something else, buried deep. Then rise, guardian, she said, and this time when he straightened, it felt less like obeying a queen and more like stepping into something that had been waiting for him all along. The royal gardens were a lie. No natural biosphere arranged itself this perfectly. Rian loved them anyway. They existed in concentric terraces spiraling around the core of Virelon Spire, each ring a different microclimate. The first was a mist forest of translucent fronds and drifting pollen lights. The second, an orchard of crystalline fruit trees whose branches rang softly when the breeze touched them. By the time you reached the third, where Maelis liked to walk, the air changed, warmer, sweeter. The plants there glowed from within, their leaves veined with slow pulses of light like they were breathing. Selathi flora is semi-reactive, Sarai explained once, darting ahead to poke a glowing vine. It curled around her finger, then released gently, pulsing a soft pink. It responds to bioelectric fields. Mother says the gardens can tell if you're angry. That true? Rian asked Maelis, who walked beside him, hands folded loosely behind her back. The gardens were grown when our people crawled out of the seas and thought we had killed the world behind us, she said. We learned to shape, not conquer. The plants reflect, amplify. It is harder to lie under their gaze. Good thing I'm a terrible liar, he said. On the contrary, she replied, glancing at him. You are quite adept at pretending you feel less than you do. He almost tripped. That an accusation, Your Majesty? An observation. Sarai ran back, grabbed his hand, and tugged. Come see this one, guardian. He let her drag him to the edge of a shallow pool. At its center, a single blossom floated. Huge, translucent, petals layered like glass. Light pulsed up from below, traveling through the veins like a slow heartbeat. When two people touch the water at the same time, Sarai said solemnly, the flower shows how their hearts speak to each other. That seems invasive, Rian murmured. She huffed. It's a game. Watch. She plunged her fingers into the water. The surface rippled, light flickering outward. Come on, she insisted. You have to. He sighed, crouched, and touched the water opposite her. For a moment, nothing. Then the flower brightened and projected a faint halo above itself, two lights, one gold, one rose, circling, bumping, springing apart, then back together. Sarai giggled. It likes you. Rian stared, weirdly unsettled. What does it mean if it didn't? It would show gray, she said matter-of-factly, or nothing at all. He glanced back at Maelis. She was watching them, not the flower, something thoughtful in her gaze. He quickly withdrew his hand. Neat party trick. Remind me not to bring any of my exes here. Too late, Sarai said cheerfully. You live here now. The days blurred into a steady rhythm. Mornings training with the luminous guard, whose initial disdain melted into respect once they realized the soft human moved like a soldier and refused to quit before they did. Afternoons shadowing Maelis in council, translating human-style bluntness into advice she occasionally, even shockingly, took. Evenings with Sarai sprawled on the floor of his assigned suite, quizzing him on Terran history while he tried to explain why anyone would invent reality TV. Some nights there were formal dinners. Rian would stand a half step behind and to the right of the sovereign, hands clasped, senses open. Maelis would glide through conversations with diplomats and nobles, her voice smooth, her words sharp. Every now and then she'd flick him a question. Guardian, tell them how your people handle pirates in the outer belts. Guardian, is it true humans once believed the stars were holes poked in a curtain? He played his part. It was easier than he'd expected. The role fit like a coat, tailored to a body he'd forgotten he had. What he didn't expect was how much he liked the quiet parts. The nights when all the ceremony was over and Maelis would send the staff away from the smaller balcony off her private study. Just her, a pot of some delicate Selathi tea. The city spread beneath like a map of light. Rian would lean on the rail, armor off, just a simple dark tunic. "Tell me about rain," she said once. "You have rain," he pointed out. "I've watched the storm systems roll over the Western Sea." "It is not the same," she said. "Your memory of it feels heavier. When you speak of it, your field thickens." "My what?" She smiled faintly. "Humans cannot see biofields, but you carry yours loudly. Your emotions crackle." "Great," he muttered. "I'm a walking static charge." "Tell me," she insisted. So he did. About the metallic smell of the sky before a storm in the Terran lowlands. About the way rain hammered on old tin roofs until you couldn't hear your own thoughts. About the feel of mud trying to steal your boots in the trenches. About the shelter of a jacket over two people's heads as they ran laughing down a flooded street. Maelis listened like it was scripture. "You miss it," she said softly when he finished. "Some parts," he admitted. "Others can stay in the memory bin." "Would you go back?" He thought about it. Really thought. "I don't know what I'd be going back to," he said finally. "Earth doesn't need another half-broken soldier with bad knees. Out here, at least, I have a job that doesn't involve shooting people for payroll." Her gaze lingered on him. "You are not half-broken," she said. "You are reassembled. That is different." "Is that a compliment?" "An observation," she said again. But there was a softness to it this time that did something inconvenient to his chest. The gardens hummed around them, light pulsing brighter where they stood. Rian pretended not to notice. Rumors moved through a palace faster than light, and with more creative editing. Rian heard them before he believed them. Whispered in training yards, half-finished sentences from servants who didn't realize he spoke enough of the Selathi tongue to understand. The sovereign smiles more now. She eats in the garden. Not alone. The guardian stands too close. He tried to ignore it, tried to keep his world simple, protect the kid, advise the queen, don't get attached. He failed spectacularly at that last part. Attachment snuck in the back door. In the way Sarai fell asleep against his shoulder during long strategy briefings. In the way Maelis' hand brushed his arm when she was tired and forgot to keep the mask up. In the way the palace no longer felt like a job site and more like a place his mind defaulted to when he thought the word home. One evening, he found Maelis not in her study, not in the throne hall, but in the gallery of echoes, a long curved corridor where the walls projected scenes from Selathar's history in slow, repeating cycles. She stood before one of the older sequences, a grainy replay of first contact between Selathi explorers and a Terran diplomatic ship. The humans looked clumsy and rigid in their environmental suits. The Selathi glided like shadows. The translator lag was seconds behind each sentence, making everything slightly comical. "My ancestor agreed to open the seas to your people here," Maelis said without turning. She did not expect friendship, only mutual profit. "Sounds like us," Rian said, stepping up beside her. "I watched this recording many times as a child," she continued. "I thought your kind were loud, ungraceful, burning through the dark, demanding everything bow to your will." "Also sounds like us," he admitted. "But then you stood in a plaza," she said quietly, "alone, outnumbered. You should have run. All logic said run. Instead, you chose to die for someone you did not know in a culture that was not your own." "Wasn't that complicated from where I was standing?" he said. "There was a gun. There was a kid." She turned to look at him. "You keep saying that as if it explains everything. Perhaps for humans it does." "You're telling me no Selathi would have done the same?" "I am telling you," she said slowly, "that many Selathi in that plaza had been trained their whole lives to die for the crown. They hesitated. You did not." Guilt jabbed him unexpectedly. "I didn't mean to shame your people." You did not, she said sharply, then softened. You reminded them. That is different. Silence stretched between them, filled with the faint murmur of ancient voices from the recording. Maelis exhaled. Something in her posture eased, like she'd set down an invisible weight. I was not there, she said, when the shots were fired. I was in council arguing over trade tariffs. Rian blinked. You've said that before. You do not understand, she said, voice low. Selathi monarchs are bound to their heirs. In older times, if a child of the crown died while the sovereign lived, the sovereign would abdicate or follow them into the sea. To lose Sarai would have been to lose my reign, my world, my... Her voice caught. My reason. He'd seen her unflappable through assassination reports, political crises, diplomatic insults that would have started wars back home. He hadn't seen this. Rian shifted, the old soldier instincts going quiet and the human ones stepping forward. I'm sorry, he said, that you had to imagine that. I did not have to imagine, she whispered. I saw it. In every flash report, in every half sentence of the chaos feed, they said a human was there, but your name did not come until later. I only knew there was fire, and my child was somewhere inside it. She looked up at him, eyes wet, but no tears fell. Selathi glands didn't work like human ones. Their grief glowed, a faint halo around the eyes, a tightening of the light lines along their throats. You gave her back to me, Maelis said, and I have not known what to do with that. Keep her, he said, love her. Yell at her when she sneaks snacks into the ward seems straightforward. A small incredulous sound left her, a half laugh, half sob. You make something immense sound simple. Maybe it is simple, he said. Doesn't mean it's easy. She stepped closer. He could feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin, see the subtle pattern of bioluminescent veins under the surface. The crown's light painted her hair in shifting colors. You are an impossible man, she murmured. Been called worse. Her hand lifted, hovered for a second, then settled, lightly, carefully, against his chest, over the place where the worst of the shots had landed. I heard your heart stop, she said. I was already coming when the healers called. The ward echoed with it, a silence that felt like the floor had fallen away. Ryan's own heart picked up, as if remembering. I got better, he said softly. Her fingers curled slightly, feeling the beat under her palm. Yes, she said. You did. They stood like that a long moment, no courtiers, no guards, just a queen and the man who'd almost died for her child anchored together by a pulse. He could have stepped back. Maybe he should have. He didn't. Instead, he lifted his own hand and, slowly enough she could have stopped him 3 times, touched her wrist just with his fingertips. The light in the walls brightened. Just a fraction. When she finally drew her hand away, the air between them felt different, charged, like the sky before one of the storms he'd described. This path is dangerous, she said quietly, for both of us. Whole galaxy's dangerous, he answered. At least this one has better scenery. She gave him a look that was entirely too fond for someone crowned by half a planet. Guard Sarai, she said, but there was a tremor in it now. And guard yourself, Rian. I would rather not owe you another life. He watched her go, the train of her gown whispering against the floor, the crown casting soft symbols on the walls. He realized 2 things as the door closed. 1, he was falling for her hard. 2, there was absolutely nothing he could or wanted to do to stop it. The first time they kissed, it was technically an accident. That was the story they both told themselves, at least. It happened on the eastward balcony, the one that caught the rising of Selathar's smaller moon. Rian liked it because it was quiet, and because the drop to the lower terraces was just dangerous enough to keep most courtiers away. He was there late, later than he should have been, leaning on the rail, watching storm fronts roll in over the distant sea, Lightning on Selithar was purple-white, branching across the sky in fractal veins. It looked happy. "You leave a void in the halls when you vanish," Maelis' voice said behind him. Rian didn't startle anymore when she did that. Queens moved like cats when they wanted to. "Thought the halls would appreciate the break," he said. "Less human clutter." She stepped up beside him, resting her hands lightly on the rail. The crown was gone. Her hair was braided back simply. She wore a long, unstructured robe the color of deep tide pools. For a moment she looked less like a sovereign and more like someone nearing the end of a very long shift. "You underestimate your own gravitational pull," she said. "Sarai sulks when she cannot find you. The Luminous Guard argue over whose squad you train with. My steward informs me the kitchen staff constantly invents human dishes to tempt you to eat more." "Tell them they're succeeding," he said. "I think I've gained back the 10 pounds the plaza stole." Her gaze flickered to him, scanning, assessing. "You are healthier," she agreed. "Less gray at the edges." He glanced at her hands on the rail. The gardens below responded to her presence as they always did, brightening, blooming subtly. When he leaned forward, some of that light bent toward him too. "Rumors are getting louder," he said quietly. "About you and the crown?" "About the crown and her very unqualified human guardian." That earned him a real smile. "You are not unqualified, Rian." "I'm not Selathi," he said. "I'm not noble. I'm not any of the things a queen is supposed to stand next to." "And what is a queen supposed to stand next to?" she asked. "Someone neat," he said after a beat. "Polished, compatible." "Compatible," she repeated, considering the word like it was a new dish she wasn't sure she liked. "Yeah, same lifespan, same number of limbs, not liable to trip over your culture's sacred protocols by accident because he thought the word for blessing meant nice hat." Maelis huffed, a soft, almost laugh. "Sarai told you about that." "She absolutely did." Silence. Rain started to fall in the distance. A curtain of shimmering violet headed their way. "Do you regret it?" she asked suddenly. "The plaza?" "Staying." He thought about the places he could have gone. None of them had names, just coordinates and vague impressions, dock bars, cargo holds, anonymous contracts. "No," he said. "Do you?" She turned fully toward him. For once there was no court, no duty, just a woman with luminous eyes and a vulnerability she was usually too disciplined to show. "I have walked my whole life on lines laid down by others," she said. "Born for a throne I did not choose. Bound to a child I would die for, and nearly did. Most days the future feels like a series of obligations with my name etched into them." Her hand lifted, hovering between them. "You are the first thing that felt like a choice." His breath hitched. Lightning flashed closer, painting her face in stark relief. He could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the kind that came not from age but from years of holding back tears. "This is a terrible idea," he said, voice low. "Yes," she agreed. We could cause a diplomatic incident." "Several," she said, "over time. Your nobles might revolt." "They adore a good scandal," she said, a hint of dry humor returning, "especially one that ends in a ballad." "We don't live the same length," he blurted, the fear finally clawing its way up. "You'll watch me get old and die while you still look like this." For a heartbeat, pain flickered across her features. Then she stepped closer, close enough that he could see his own reflection in her eyes. "I have already lived through losing one heart," she whispered. "I have no desire to spend the rest of my days hiding from the possibility of pain by denying the possibility of joy." His throat closed. "Rian," she said. And his name in her voice wasn't a title, wasn't a command. It was a plea. "Tell me truthfully, do you wish to leave? To walk away now, before this becomes too heavy?" He thought of walking out of the palace, of taking a shuttle to some distant rock and pretending this had been a dream, of watching news feeds of Selithar from cheap hostel bunks, wondering what Sarai was learning, Who was guarding her? Who Maelis was smiling at? The idea made his lungs refuse to work. "No," he said raw. "I don't." The storm wind reached the balcony, cool and sharp with ozone. Her hair lifted around her like a halo. "Then stay," she said. He didn't know who moved first. One moment, they were two separate bodies on an open balcony arguing with the universe. The next, he was leaning down and she was stepping up, and their mouths met in a kiss that felt less like breaking a rule and more like finally admitting they'd been breaking it in their heads for weeks. She tasted like the tea she favored, spiced, unfamiliar, addictive. Her hands came up to his shoulders, fingers digging in like she wasn't sure he was real. His own slid to her waist, the thin fabric of her robe a poor barrier against the warmth of her body. The gardens bloomed. No, actually bloomed, flowers opening all at once, vines flaring with sudden light. Somewhere, a sensor panel probably flagged the spike in environmental response, but Rian didn't care. The kiss deepened, turned softer, then hungry, then reverent. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the rain had reached them, pattering against the balcony shield like 1,000 tiny drums. "Definitely a mistake," he said hoarsely. "Yes," Maelis said, eyes blazing. "One I intend to make again." He laughed, helpless, and pulled her back in. For once, he didn't think about consequences, didn't think about war or duty or aging at different rates. He thought about the fact that for the first time in years, his heart wasn't just beating out of habit. It was beating for something, for someone. And the universe, storming, glowing, impossible, seemed, just for that moment, to approve. The rain shields shimmered to life a few breaths after they broke apart. The palace's automated systems deciding the Sovereign did not, in fact, need to be soaked during whatever it thought this was. A dome of invisible force bent the falling storm around them, violet drops sliding off in sheets that glittered under the balcony lights. For a few breaths, neither of them said anything. Rian listened to the thunder roll and tried to commit every detail to memory. The feel of her fingers curled in the fabric at his shoulders, the faint hum in the air where their biofields overlapped, the way her eyes looked less like polished stone now and more like deep water. Maelis was the first to step back. Barely. Just enough to let the air slip between them again. Her hand stayed on his chest, one palm flat over that stubborn heart. "If we continue," she said quietly, "we will be giving my entire advisory council strokes." "Do they deserve it?" he asked. "And many of them," she admitted. "Then I'm struggling to see the downside." She huffed out a breath that might have been a laugh if her throat weren't so tight. "You make light of everything?" "Not everything, Ramo," he said. "Just the parts that scare me." "And this?" Her fingers flexed once, pressing against bone and scar. "Does this scare you, Guardian?" "Terrifies me," Rian said honestly. "But so did running at Plasma Fire." "And yet you did." "And yet I did." She studied him for a moment longer, then stepped fully back, shoulders gathering the mantle of command again. The change was subtle but unmistakable. He would have missed it months ago. Now he could feel it like a temperature shift. "I have counsel at dawn," she said. "You have training at 6 bells. If we are to be foolish, let us at least be well-rested fools." "Yes, Your Majesty," he said. It came out softer than protocol demanded. "Maelis," she corrected, just before she turned away. "Out here, when we are alone, you may call me Maelis." He swallowed. "Then you better keep bringing me out here." She did not answer aloud, but the slight curve of her lips said enough. Then she left him, with the storm. Rian stayed on the balcony until the rain passed and the smaller moon sank. The gardens below flickered through colors, slowly returning to their usual glow. When he finally pulled himself away, the palace felt different. It wasn't the architecture that had changed. It was all in the way his footsteps echoed, less like a guest, more like someone walking through his own life. Sleep was thin and restless. His dreams were a jumble of gunfire and glowing gardens and hands on his chest. When the wake chime rang, he was already awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering just how catastrophically he'd altered the trajectory of his existence. Then Sarai hurled herself through his door. "Guardian, you missed first bell!" She launched at the bed like a missile, bouncing once on the mattress and landing sprawled over his legs. Rian let out a grunt as healing muscles protested. "Assassins?" he asked, scrubbing a hand over his face. "Invasion? The breakfast line ran out of that citrus bread?" "All tragedies," she said solemnly. "But no. Mother says your schedule is unchanged, even if your brain is sleeping." Her eyes narrowed. "You look weird." "Weird how?" "Like you're thinking too much," she said, climbing up to sit cross-legged by his hip. "Mother looked like that when I saw her this morning, too. Did you two fight?" Ryan's heart did an uncomfortable little flip. "No, we didn't fight." "Good." Sarai nodded decisively. "When adults fight, everyone's biofields taste bad." "I'm not asking how you know what biofields taste like," he said, throwing the covers back, "but I'm going to request you never describe mine that way." "Yours tastes like lightning and tea," she said, completely unbothered. "Come on, if you're late, Commander Chaw will make you run the spiral again." He groaned. The spiral was a training course someone had designed while personally offended by the concept of knees. "Fine, I'm getting up." Sarai hopped off the bed and scampered toward the door. Halfway there, she turned back and squinted at him with a suspicious tilt of the head. "You're sure you're not sick?" she asked. "You're glowing a little." "That's probably just the nanites," he lied. "Go, or Jaw's going to make both of us run the spiral." She shrieked and bolted. The morning hammered at him like any other. The luminous guard did not care that he'd kissed their queen. They cared that his footwork was sloppy on the fourth form and that his guard dropped half a second late in a 3-on-1 drill. Sweat and bruises carved away some of the static in his head. By mid-afternoon, he'd almost convinced himself he'd imagined the whole balcony thing. Queens didn't kiss ex-Legion drifters. That was fairy tale nonsense. Then Maelis caught his eye in council, and the memory hit like a struck nerve. She was all crown again, voice level as she pierced a trade. Delegates' evasions with a few precise questions. But when the man finally slunk out, chastened and promising updated tariffs, she turned just enough that only Ryan could see the small, quick smile at the corner of her mouth. His chest warmed. They didn't talk that night, not alone. Duty piled on duty, and he spent most of the evening in the upper gallery, quietly watching for signs of danger while Maelis hosted a delegation from the Corval hegemony. It was all polished speeches and empty toasts, no room for stolen touches. Still, every now and then, he felt her presence in his peripheral awareness, like a star's gravity you couldn't see but couldn't escape. It went on like that for days. Life, stubbornly, kept happening. The palace adapted faster than gossip did. The staff noticed the way the gardens flared when certain two people walked through them together and quietly adjusted light levels so the effect looked like an intentional art display. The cooks added more Terran dishes to the menu and pretended not to see when the Sovereign stole bites off Ryan's plate with the ease of long familiarity. The nobles gossiped, of course. They always did. But the story of the Plaza of Echoing Glass had sunk roots too deep in Selathi culture now. For every outraged traditionalist muttering about bloodlines and propriety, there were 10 common citizens hanging crystal charms of human and queen entwined, thanking whatever forces they believed in that their ruler smiled again. Sarai, for her part, moved through the palace like a tiny storm cell, unaware of the tectonic plates shifting beneath her feet. Or, more likely, aware, but choosing to interpret it in the most straightforward way possible. "You like each other," she said bluntly one evening, sprawled on the floor of Ryan's suite, building towers out of discarded data chips. "Good, you both needed someone." Rian nearly choked on his tea. You're 8. 8 3/4, she corrected. Not a hatchling. I can feel things, Guardian. I'm sure you can, he said, setting the cup down carefully. And what exactly do you feel? That Mother doesn't want to be alone anymore. Sarai spoke without looking up, fingers busy arranging chips in a spiral. She hums differently when you're near, and you stop dreaming about fire as much. He froze. How do you know about my dreams? You shout, she said simply. The walls hear. The gardens hear. I hear. Guilt twisted in his stomach. Sorry, didn't mean to keep you up. It's better now, she said. You still dream, but you don't get stuck. You wake up and breathe, and your field settles. He sank down onto the floor beside her. Who taught you to talk like this? Uncle Tavrin, she said. He says our family's curse is feeling too much and talking too little. Sounds accurate, Rian muttered. Sarai finally looked up at him. Her eyes were solemn, older than they had any right to be. Humans die faster than us, she said, as if reciting a fact from a lesson slate. I read that. He swallowed. That's true. You're worried it will hurt us, she said. Yes. Good, she said simply, and went back to stacking chips. What? Rian stared. That's your response? If you weren't worried, she said, it would mean you didn't care enough. We can heal from hurt. We cannot heal from emptiness. He sat there, floored by an 8-year-old. I want you to stay, Guardian, she added quietly, and even if it hurts later, I'd rather have now. His eyes stung. You're too wise for this place. Mother says I'm too honest, she said and grinned. Come on, help me build a tower taller than Commander Jawl. He did. Later, when she'd fallen asleep half on his lap, he carefully carried her back to her own bed, tucking her beneath sheets that glowed faintly with protective sigils. Maelis was there, leaning in the doorway, arms folded, watching. She cornered you? The Queen asked, voice soft. Like a tactical genius, he said. I think she's running guerrilla warfare on our emotional avoidance. Maelis huffed. She always did take after her grandmother in the worst ways. In this case, Rian said, brushing a stray feather of hair from Sarai's forehead, it might be the best. Maelis's gaze lingered on him. In the quiet dim of her daughter's room with only the soft glow of wall sigils for light, she looked less like a leader and more like a mother terrified of the future and grateful for the present in equal measure. Walk with me, she said. They ended up back in the gardens, as they so often did. The night air was cool, the twin moons casting overlapping shadows across the paths. Firefly-like motes drifted above the pools, drawn to warmth and movement. No balcony tonight, Rian said, shoving his hands into his pockets, trying to avoid repeating mistakes. You assume the balcony was the mistake, she said. He glanced at her. You don't? I think, she said slowly, the mistake would be pretending it didn't happen. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Sarai knows, Maelis went on. Or at least she understands in her own way. The court suspects. The choirs have already written 3 songs. She gave him a rueful smile. Selathi art is not subtle. So what do? He asked. Hide? Sneak around? Pretend we're just very intense co-workers? Do you wish to hide? She asked. He thought of a life of shadows, of slipping through back corridors and pretending his heart wasn't written all over his face every time she entered a room. He'd lived in shadows before. They'd nearly killed him. No, he said, I don't. Nor do I, Maelis said. She stopped beside one of the star petal pools, the same one Sarai had dragged him to weeks ago. The bloom at its center shifted gently, sensing them. My advisors will fret. They will bring me lists of reasons why this union would be politically unwise. We will have to listen. Then, she added, a spark in her eyes, we will have to decide if we care. And the answer? He asked. She looked up at him, and there was nothing of the sovereign in her gaze now, just Maelis, just a woman who'd spent too long alone in rooms full of people. "I care that you lived," she said. "I care that Sarai laughs again. I care that when I walk these halls, I no longer feel like a ghost haunting my own life. The rest?" She lifted her shoulders in a small, elegant shrug. "Empires have survived worse than their queen loving unwisely." "Is that what this is?" he asked quietly. "Unwise?" "Yes," she said, and gloriously. Something in him unclenched then. He stepped closer until there was barely space between them. The gardens brightened, anticipating. "Then let's be unwise properly," he said. "Tell them, in whatever overly poetic, crown-approved way you want. Let them scream and sing and write ballads. I'll stand there and look intimidating." "You always look intimidating," she said, amused, "even when you were stealing extra dessert from the kitchens." "That's strategic," he said. "Fear-based pastry acquisition." She laughed, truly laughed, and it rang through the garden like a note the world had been missing. Then she reached up and cupped his face between her hands. "Stay," she whispered again, though they both knew he already had. "Stand beside me when I face them, not as guardian, as whatever the human word is for one who shares your heart." "Plenty of words," he said, "a partner, lover, idiot who stands in front of plasma bolts for you." "I am fond of the last one," she murmured, and kissed him. They took their time walking back. Hand in hand, biofields weaving, the palace's grown intelligence quietly adjusting light and temperature around them as if to say, "Noted." Updating parameters. The announcement took place in the Hall of Stars because of course it did. Rian hated the Hall of Stars. Not because it wasn't beautiful, it was stunning. A vast open chamber whose walls projected a live composite of the night sky, Selathar's constellations burning bright. No, he hated it because it took every instinct honed in cramped troop carriers and shoved it into a space with no obvious cover. Today it was packed. Nobles in their finest robes, common citizens chosen by lottery, representatives from half a dozen allied worlds. News orbs floated like lazy fish near the ceiling, lenses gleaming, the air buzzed. He stood to Maelis's right and half a step behind, informal guardian regalia, dark armored coat fitted to his frame, shoulders marked with the silver sigil of the crown, breastplate polished enough to reflect the star field. It felt like wearing someone else's honor. Sarai stood on Maelis's left, in a smaller, simpler version of her mother's robe. She bounced on the balls of her feet, barely containing her excitement. "You're sure?" Rian murmured out of the side of his mouth. "We could still claim a tactical gas leak and evacuate." "Too late," Maelis said, voice calm. "I have already canceled 3 council sessions for this. If we retreat now, the ministers will start ritual sacrifices." He winced. "You're joking." "Mostly," she said. The star choir fell silent. A subtle harmonic note thrummed through the air, Selathi tradition for all eyes front. Maelis stepped forward onto the dais, and the crowd's murmur died at once. "My people," she said, and the room leaned in. "We stand on the far side of a wound." She let the words hang there, no rush to fill the silence. "Cycles ago," she continued, "our palace bled, our air bled. Terror walked our plaza in borrowed faces and tried to carve fear into our bones. We survived, yes. But survival alone is not healing. Healing is choosing what story we tell about what happened." Images flickered briefly in the air. Stylized hollow of the plaza of echoing glass. Attackers blotted out. The small form of a child. The silhouette of a man standing between her and the guns. "When fire came," Maelis said, "one soul chose to stand where there was no shield, no promise of rescue. He was not Selathi. He was not sworn. He asked no permission, and he expected no reward. He simply decided in the space of a heartbeat that a child he did not know was worth more than his life. The projection shifted to Ryan's figure as the palace had reconstructed it. He resisted the urge to look away. In him, we saw something we had begun to forget, Maelis said. That courage does not belong to bloodlines. That love is not the sole province of family. That compassion can arrive from the stars in the form of a tired human with an old pistol and an inconvenient conscience. A ripple of laughter quickly choked down. I named him guardian of the first heir, she said, that the law recognizes him. The songs already sing of him. Her voice softened. My heart has done something worse, or better. Ryan's pulse thudded in his ears. I have fallen in love with him. No translation filter could blunt that. The words exploded in the hall like a hidden charge. Gasps, shocked exclamations. A couple of nobles actually swooned. Rian hadn't thought that was a real thing. Maelis let it roll. She'd faced war fleets with less composure. I will not pretend this is easy, she said. He is human. I am Selathi. Our lifespans do not match. Our bones are not made of the same minerals. Our cultures are separated by light years in history. But our hearts... She touched her own chest lightly, then gestured toward him. Our hearts recognize something in each other that my ancestors wrote about, and my advisors call impractical. Sarai stepped forward unprompted and grabbed Ryan's hand, lifting it slightly as if presenting evidence to the jury. I choose him, Maelis said, not as a symbol, as my partner, as the one who walks beside the crown when decisions are made, as the one who tucks our child into bed, as the one I would rather face the end of my days with, no matter how many or few they are. Her gaze swept the hall. If you cannot accept that, I will hear your objections. I am your sovereign. I owe you that. But know this, I will not unchoose him to buy your comfort. I would rather rule a smaller, truer world than a vast, hollow one. Silence. Then someone began to sing. It started in the upper tiers, one voice carrying the old Selathi melody of gratitude. Another joined, then another, until the hall of stars vibrated with layer on layer of harmony. The nobles who'd been prepared to object suddenly found themselves drowned in sound. Rian swallowed hard. The music hit him somewhere deep, activating parts of his brain that had nothing to do with language. Warmth climbed up his spine. Maelis turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. See, her look seemed to say. They will live. He stepped forward to stand fully at her side. His voice wouldn't carry like hers, but that wasn't the point. He just needed to say it out loud. I'm not good at speeches, he said, and several people actually laughed. It broke the tension like a cracked window letting in air. But I'm good at two things, standing where I said I'd stand and doing the stupid, brave thing when the universe throws a choice at me. He looked out over the sea of luminous faces. This is the stupid, brave thing, he said. Loving someone who'll probably outlive me by centuries, letting myself belong somewhere again, saying yes to a world that might hurt like hell when it eventually has to let me go. He felt Maelis's fingers brush his. A small contact, invisible to all but the closest, grounding him. I'm saying yes anyway, he finished, not because I think I deserve it, but because your queen does, and your princess does, and, he exhaled, because I'm tired of pretending humans are only good at burning things down. Sometimes we get to build something too. The hall erupted again, this time not with shock, but with something wilder and brighter. The Selathi didn't clap. They layered their voices higher, the chords building until the air itself seemed to shimmer. Above them, the starfield projection shifted. For a moment, the constellations bent, rearranged, lines of light drawing between a Terran spiral arm marker and Selithar's system glyph. The palace's intelligence, it seemed, had opinions on storytelling. That night, Viralone did not sleep. The Festival of Confluence had existed for centuries before a human ever set foot in Selithar's seas. It celebrated tides and sky alignments, the slow turning of the planet under its moons. That year, it became something else. Rian walked the processional route at Maelis' side, Sarai skipping just ahead, tossing petals that glowed faintly as they fell. The crowd pressed in along the route, restrained only by gentle shimmer walls. Faces upon faces upon faces, all luminous, all watching. "Smile," Maelis murmured. "You look like you're about to be executed." "This many people cheering for me feels suspicious," he muttered. "Get used to it," Sarai called back over her shoulder. "You're part of the story now." Vendors had already capitalized, stalls selling woven charms of tiny human queen princess trios, sweets shaped like plasma bursts dissolving into flowers, little wooden pistols that fired harmless light. Street performers reenacted the plaza scene in highly dramatized fashion. The actor playing Rian was taller, handsomer, and managed to make 9 plasma hits look like an elaborate dance. "Am I that dramatic?" Rian asked. "Worse," Maelis said fondly. At the central plaza, they climbed the ceremonial steps together. Rian glanced up at the towering glass structures surrounding them. Once he'd bled out here. Now the city itself had woven that moment into its identity. The ceremony that followed was long and layered. Blessings to the sea, to the sky, to the balance between. At one point, Maelis placed her hand on his shoulder and formally bound his guardian title into the ancient rolls, the glyphs of his name flaring in the air: Rian Cole of Terra, Guardian, and Heart Companion. "You're carved into our history now," she murmured. "Too late to escape." "Guess I'll have to make us worth the ink," he said. Later, when the official part was done and the sun slid low, the dance of dual suns began. Pairs stepped into the plaza, some lovers, some siblings, some sworn comrades, and moved in swirling patterns as the music rose. Maelis extended a hand without a word. Rian took it. They moved into the dance, guided by subtle pressure and instinct. He'd never learned the formal steps, not really. But the Selathi pattern wasn't about precision, it was about balance. One stepped forward as the other yielded, then reversed like tides trading places. "Don't overthink," Maelis said. "Feel." "Feeling is the problem," he said, but he let her lead. Then gradually, they started leading each other. The crowd circled them, voices rising. Sarai darted among the other dancers, laughing, occasionally cutting in to spin between them like a third orbiting body. For one bright, stretched-out moment, Rian let go of the weight of what it all meant. The future, with its inevitable grief. The past, with its scars. There was only the present, Maelis' hand in his, her eyes shining, their feet sure on the stone where he'd once bled. When the song ended, the cheers washed over them like surf. Much later, when the lanterns had burned low and the city finally began to quiet, they stood together on the highest terrace of the gardens. Sarai had fallen asleep draped over Rian's back earlier, and now lay curled on a bench, wrapped in Maelis' robe. "You did well," Maelis said softly, watching the slow rise and fall of her daughter's chest. "Didn't trip over my own feet, didn't swear into a news orb. I'm calling it a win." "That is not what I meant." He knew. He didn't push. "You realize this will spread," she said after a while. "Beyond Selathar, beyond human space. Other worlds will ask if they, too, can trust humans with their future, or Selathi with their hearts. Our story will be used as proof, or as warning." "What do you want it to be?" he asked. She considered. The moons painted her profile in silver. "Proof," she said finally, "that we can choose each other even when it is not easy. That fear does not have to write the end of every tale." "Then that's what will make it," he said. "How?" She sounded genuinely curious, as if he had better answers than she did. "Same way I did in the plaza," he said. "One choice at a time, one day at a time. Get up, put on the armor, walk beside you, protect the kid, try not to be an idiot. Repeat." She smiled, slow and warm. You simplify galaxies, Rian. Somebody has to, he said. You keep track of the tides. I'll handle the walking. Her hand found his again. The gardens glowed a little brighter, as if approving. Years later, when the legends had grown fat and ridiculous, when the songs had added dragons that never existed and increased the number of plasma shots to an even dozen, there were still nights that belonged only to them. Rian's hair was threaded with gray now, the lines at the corners of his eyes deeper. His knee complained more often on the spiral course. The healers offered him enhanced treatments, lifespan extensions borrowed from Selathi Biotech, and he took some of them, enough to stay on his feet longer, not enough to erase what he was. Maelis's face changed little. Selathi aging was slower, subtle, but he could see it, now that he knew where to look. A slight deepening of light lines along her throat, a gravity to her gaze that decades of ruling had etched. Sarai grew the fastest. She shot up past his shoulder, then his ear, all teenage limbs and fierce opinions. She sparred with the luminous guard and debated policy with her mother in the same afternoon. She still called him guardian when she was exasperated and dad when she was scared. On one quiet evening, the three of them sat in the gardens, the same third terrace where star petals bloomed. The air was thick with the scent of night blossoms. The city hummed in the distance, alive and peaceful. They told the plaza story again in civics class, Sarai grumbled, lying on her back in the grass, hands folded over her stomach. Except this time they said you shouted a battle hymn in 3 languages. I grunted and swore, Rian said, not nearly as quotable. They added a bit where the attackers burst into flame, she added. That part didn't happen either. I know that, she said, but my classmates don't. Half of them look at you like you wrestle suns for exercise. Let them, Maelis said, from where she leaned against Rian's side. A little awe never hurt a guardian. It makes them forget you're human, Sarai said stubbornly. That you get tired, that your bones hurt when the weather shifts. She rolled onto her side to look at him. They forget that you won't be here forever. Rian met her gaze. There it was, spoken plain. The thing they all circled. I'm here now, he said, and I'm not planning on going anywhere without a fight. That is not a comfort, she said, but her mouth twitched upward. Maelis's hand tightened around his. He is quite difficult to remove, she said dryly. Believe me, I have tried to imagine it. I do not like the result. Sarai huffed and flopped back onto the grass. I just wish... I know, Rian said. I wish too. He didn't pretend otherwise. Didn't offer hollow lines about everything being fine. Part of the reason they trusted him was that he never lied about the hard parts. We cannot slow time, Maelis said quietly, but we can decide how to fill it. Sarai made a frustrated noise. With more council meetings? With more of this, Maelis said. She gestured around them. With gardens and arguments and festivals and late-night tea. With work that matters and rest that does too. With a father who insists on teaching my ministers Terran card games until they forget how to act superior. That last part is key, Rian said, and can't have them getting complacent. You're infuriating, Sarai said, but she smiled as she said it. Family trait, he replied. Later, when Sarai had gone off to some late lesson and the gardens were quiet again, Rian and Maelis stayed where they were, side by side on the grass like two teenagers hiding from chores. Do you regret it? He asked suddenly. Any of it? She turned her head to look at him. Ask me that again after I've ruled for another 100 cycles without you, she said. For now, the answer is no. You don't know how bad I'll limp in 20 years, he said. I look forward to finding out, she said. He chuckled. The sound turned into a cough halfway through, and he hated that. Her hand rubbed slow circles between his shoulder blades until it passed. Rian, she said softly, I have walked this world since long before you were born. I have seen seas rise and empires fall. I have survived losing a mate and nearly losing a child. I will, God's willing, see the day our daughter takes the crown from my head with her own hands. Do you truly think I would trade the years we have had for a few less aches? He closed his eyes. The fear that had lived in his chest since the night on the balcony uncurled just a little more. No, he said, I guess not. Good, she murmured and kissed his temple. Then stop rehearsing your exit and be here. He did. When history later tried to distill their lives into neat lines, it failed. They were not one moment, not one plaza, one kiss, one speech. They were 1,000 breakfasts, 100 arguments, dozens of scarred knuckles from training, 5 failed attempts at baking a Terran cake in a Selathi kitchen, 3 outbreaks of diplomatic fiasco narrowly avoided because a human pointed out how stupid everyone was being, and infinite small, unremarkable choices to stay. The HFY recordings, the ones humans passed around on the nets with breathless excitement, loved to linger on the heroic bits. He took 9 shots for an alien child. He stood beside a queen and told a galaxy no. They were important, sure, they just weren't the whole. If you asked Ryan, the real miracle wasn't that he'd survived the plaza. It was that after surviving, he'd let himself live. Years after his hair had gone mostly silver, after Sarai had taken on more and more of the daily governance, after his name had been etched in archives on worlds he'd never visit, there was an evening much like the first, a balcony, a storm, the taste of rain in the air. He stood at Maelis' side, both of them leaning on the rail. His knee ached, his chest twinged where old wounds had never quite stopped reminding him of themselves. Her light lines glowed a little less bright, but her eyes, gods, her eyes, were the same. They're telling the plaza story down in the lower terraces again, he said. I heard the music. They add verses every cycle, she said. Soon the song will be longer than the event. Artists always were liars, he said. Liars, she agreed, in pursuit of a deeper truth. He watched the lightning flicker over the sea. What's the deeper truth here, then? That a man who wanted to die found a reason to live, she said, and that a world that feared outsiders learned to let one into its heart. Sounds tidy when you say it, he said. It was not tidy, she admitted. It was gloriously unwise. He smiled, lines around his eyes deepening. Worth it, though. She slid her hand into his. His skin was rough, hers smooth and faintly luminescent, but they fit like they'd been designed that way. Every breath, she said. The storm rolled in. The shield shimmered to life. Rain curved around them in a curtain of violet fire. Rian Cole, ex-Legion drifter, guardian of Selethar, the human in 1,000 exaggerated songs, stood where it had all begun and knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that if he had to choose again, he'd still drop the synth coffee, still run toward the guns, still throw himself between a child and the fire, not because he was fearless, because he was afraid and chose anyway. That was the oldest human magic, the one thing no alien, no AI, no empire could replicate. He squeezed Maelis' hand. She squeezed back. Far below, the city glittered. Somewhere in its maze, a young cadet told the plaza story to her friends, eyes shining as she reached the part where the human stood alone. Somewhere else, a child with Terran brown eyes and Selathi light lines traced the pattern of both worlds in a school book and decided to be brave someday. The universe spun on, and in a corner of it, on a balcony above a garden that glowed in response to love, a human heartbeat, not out of habit, not out of duty, but because it had finally found someplace and someone worth beating for. The end. If you love HFY stories where humanity changes entire civilizations through courage, compassion, and heart, make sure you subscribe for more tales that prove our light can cross the stars.